What good news did you hear with regard to what the president's bucket of cash has for us?
Unfortunately, the president didn't promise a check to us. I think this was really helping demonstrate the need for the American Jobs Plan and the fact that if you create jobs and you direct those jobs to build things like infrastructure, it's a win-win both for the nation and for the state. And he was able to highlight things like the Calcasieu River Bridge being an example of how we have not been able to keep up with the cost of inflation, and that the federal government has a responsibility to be a part of that solution. The big takeaway for me, Aaron, was he is not looking at an infrastructure week. He has been talking about infrastructure for some time in light of the pandemic. And he's looking even beyond just the American Jobs Plan, but also looking at reauthorization, which is a 6-year bill. And so his efforts to build infrastructure with a capital I covers everything from clean drinking water and lead pipe removal to roads and bridges and airports and dredging rivers and transit, just a number of things that absolutely are essential. And by the way, all of those are things that connect to give us a D+, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. And so we typically get that grade every 2 years. It has not gotten better since I've been at the department. I don't think that's a reflection on me. I think it's a reflection on the age and the condition of our system. And so the president's thinking big about building back better and addressing all levels of infrastructure and creating jobs for folks in several different disciplines simultaneously.
He pledged in one of his sound bites maybe a new bridge, I-10 over Calcasieu. Were there other comments that you heard that that he knows there are other needs, particularly up in our area in Northwest Louisiana with regard to bridges, et cetera?
Well, he didn't mention any project specific to Northwest Louisiana. He talked about the need to continually invest systematically. Now, he did speak to not just the top 10 most economically significant bridges, if they were to fail, I would suggest to you. But he talked about the 12 to 20,000 smaller bridges all across the country, many of which exist in Louisiana, particularly our rural communities. And so his agenda isn't just about urban infrastructure. It's about rural infrastructure as well. And a part of his package will address those bridges that are load posted and are in poor condition. And many of those are going to be the bridges that are low average daily traffic bridges, low car volume. And as a result of that, we can make a significant investment. And look, the reality is many of those bridges, if we can do that over an 8-year period, is much smarter than what we did when we built them, because we built most of those bridges all around the same 2 to 3 year window. And guess what? They all are aging out at the same time. So he's taking a systematic approach to investing in infrastructure in a big way. Whether it's broadband, that applies to Northwest Louisiana. Whether it's lead pipe removal, that applies to areas potentially in rural parts of our state. Whether it's airport infrastructure improvements or transit, which is a big part of what his agenda is on terms of rail, that would affect Northwest Louisiana. So clearly there's place for everyone in Louisiana to be a part of the AJP.
Dr. Shawn, I don't know the details or the particulars of your job, but it seems to me that in most things involving the federal government, when they start dishing out money, when they start making promises, when they start doling out cash, there's strings involved. What would be the strings in this case?
Well, I think the strings in this case are thinking forward. For example, a part of his package is saying, how are we going to address electric vehicles? And he has created a revenue source or a plan to help incentivize that in our state. And so when we look at rolling out electric vehicle charging stations, think about what happened with gas stations when the Model T Ford came up. You could only go certain places because you needed to get gas. There had to be an effort to help stabilize the system of delivery of that energy source. And so for us in Louisiana, we think there's some private opportunity to create those with some public incentives so that we can then in a robust way have an electric charging system in our state. Same thing with broadband. In order for us to have a competitive and economically affordable piece, the state is going to be looking at trying to provide that and ensuring that the service is there. So I don't think there are any extraordinary strings other than performance, things around, for example, climate change. What are we going to be doing to address, greenhouse gas emissions in our state? those are the things I think that is the policy initiative that's going to be pushed by the dollars. I don't think they want to just give money to just go build capacity. They want us to be smart with the money they build, and I think that's what we've seen in every presidential administration in terms of those strings that you mentioned.
I don't mean to go down a rabbit hole here, but I would think that government mandates on greenhouse gases state to state would be a pretty big deal, but you don't think it is?
I don't think it is, because I think the industry here accepts the fact that we're going to have to transition, and how do we manage that transition? When automakers like General Motors, who are producing the vast majority of the cars that you see driving perhaps in our country, when they say that they're not going to be producing anything but electric vehicles by 2030, that tells us something has got to happen between now and when they get to that critical mass. And even then, you're still going to have some combustible engines, if you will, traditional vehicles that we're driving today, maybe more hybrids, but you're still going to have some cars that are going to be there. So these things can't happen quickly, but they have to start somewhere. And look, those are huge transformative things, but they're things that I don't think anyone is rejecting, particularly in the private sector. You know, the governor has a climate change council here that is heavily engaged with the chemical industry and other private sector entities, and there's fundamental agreement that we have to begin the process to transition to some place. How do we manage that transition? How do you operationalize that transition is what's important.